GDOC 2020. Let's talk about advanced game feel. Now, when you're playing a game that really has you feeling immersed in it, it feels less like you're playing a game and more like you're just playing, just exploring a world. So in this talk, we're going to discuss what it takes to create game mechanics that leave players feeling satisfied and validated. Now, our speaker, Claude, is a game designer with over 10 years of experience working on games like Skylanders and the Destiny franchise. He has a focus and a passion for building genuinely satisfying and memorable game experiences. Give it up for our next speaker, Claude.
Hey everybody, welcome and thank you for being here. I am super excited to give this talk. It's something I wanted to talk about for a long time, something I'm really passionate about. I just kind of want to dive right in. So my name is Claude. I'm a principal gameplay designer at Firewalk Studios. I've been lucky enough to be in the industry so far for a little bit over a decade, and I've gotten the chance to work on a lot of different types of games and just different types of experiences. Everything between educational games to movie tie-ins, all the way up to sort of worldwide AAA franchises even. And honestly, I keep coming back to action games. It just feels like my favorite type of thing to work on. So I've spent most of my career just trying to make it feel good to punch stuff. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. It's game feel. Or more specifically, advanced game feel. And what do I mean by advanced? Well, obviously it's not an introduction. There's a bunch of good stuff out there for that. Game Feel by Steve Swink is one of my favorites. So is The Nuance of Juice, a talk by Lisa Brown. I learned a lot from these two, but I want to keep the conversation going. So I'm not going to talk about what's been covered. So for instance, I'm not going to talk about the secrets to tuning the perfect camera shake. And I'm not going to go over a hit list of everything you must do in every game to make it feel good. Instead, what I want to talk about is a process, a practical framework that I use in my day-to-day. I want to show how systems and expressive mechanics can contribute to game feel just as much, if not more, than things like camera shake. And I want to go over how I use this framework in a second-to-second breakdown of Destiny 2 gameplay footage. So what do I mean by frameworks? For most creative disciplines, as you start to master your craft, there's a sort of shift from relying on pure instinct and fleeting inspiration to something of a structured process. Simple statements or rules that help you focus your energy on what really matters. Having a framework for thinking about game feel helps you generate more ideas for game feel. This is crucial because things start to really feel especially amazing when you get 1,000 little things right. It all adds up to something really unforgettable. It's been a rare privilege to be able to focus solely on gameplay design and feel for so many years now. Spending that time working with amazing different minds from all corners of the industry has helped me sort of come to some fascinating insights and form my own process, my own framework. And that's what I wanted to share. So to break down how my framework works, it's sort of based on 3 tenets: validation, self-expression, and the translation of intent. I've even boiled these principles down into a simple statement. Game feel is the emotional response to the validation of expectation and expression. Super simple, right? It's a pretty loaded statement, though, so I wanted to visit each of those tenets individually and sort of unpack it a little. Starting with validation. So we all know that feedback is important, but why? Why is it so crucial? I believe it's because feedback at its core is about validation, and we all want to be validated. We all want to know that our impact matters. And so if we reframe the purpose of feedback as validation, we can continuously find opportunities to add more satisfying layers of feedback. And that's because framing it this way asks us to think about feedback less reactively and more as a continuum. You can essentially ask yourself, how can I use feedback to validate how something works before, during, and after the actual interaction? How can I continuously validate all the ways that jump works, for instance? So I want to look at an example from Celeste. This is an amazing game in general, and their feedback is great. And you can see sort of all the layers of validation in action here with this jump, for instance. The takeoff force, the directionality, the trajectory, the anticipation of landing, the sort of force of the land. I'm sure there's a ton more, but at the core here is that we're trying to validate the rules and the systems of the mechanic, the jump mechanic. Then, as players start to master those systems and rules, the feedback validates what they've learned. And that's what makes it really gratifying. It's sort of telling you, it's meeting your expectations. It's telling you that you've got it right, that you understand how this works, and it's validating your knowledge and learning. Next up is self-expression. This is about having layers of choice within mechanics. It's not just about what you can do, but how. Are you an aggressive player? Are you timid? Are you stylish? Are you efficient? Truly expressive mechanics let you show who you are through your choices. This is what's at the heart of Mario's jump, why it's so timeless, why it's so classic. Hold down the jump button to jump higher, jump farther by getting a running start. There's a reason that this hyper-expressive movement model really redefined platformers when it came out. It's also why analog systems are so powerful. They allow you to make continuous input matter. Just think about it. Every millisecond that you're pushing down the jump button or pushing on an analog stick, the individual contractions of muscle fiber in your hand are being translated to meaningful actions on the screen. That's you in the game. And so when you combine the idea of continuous input with choice within mechanics, you get this idea of analog expression. You create a one-to-one relationship between your brain and what's happening to the character on the screen. Your actions and your identity are more closely tied together. They're more closely connected. And that's why I believe that analog expression approximates self. It approximates who you are, especially when there are meaningfully different ways to express yourself. This is the core relationship between expression and immersion. It creates a believable connection between the game world and who you are. Analog expression is also not just limited to input devices either. It can be purely about just the number of options you have as a player. Like in an RPG, it can be about the breadth of choices you can make to describe your character or your actions. Or even in a game like Devil May Cry, where you launch guys into the air and you juggle them based on the attacks you're using, and how you might choose to do that differently than someone else. Those are both examples of really hyper-expressive systems. The problem with this, though, is it comes with an even bigger burden of intent translation. You have to get it right because you have so much more valid input. What do I mean by that? Well, at the end of the day, you can have the best feedback in the world. You can have amazing camera shakes, badass effects, cool animation systems, you name it. But as soon as the button doesn't do what you expect, the whole thing breaks down. The illusion is shattered, and you're immediately reminded that you're just holding a piece of plastic in your hands. So essentially, intent translation is just about reading your mind as best we can to prevent that break of immersion. We've got to go all the way from your brain through an input device, create an intuitive button layout and offer remapping options, figure out what we think you're trying to do, resolve that against the game rules, and then make sure whatever shows up on screen actually makes sense to you, that it matches your expectations. It's a pretty daunting proposition, and it only gets harder, like I said, when you have more inputs that are valid. So we'll talk about some solutions to that in a little bit. But to summarize, I'll say it again. Game feel is the emotional response to the validation of expectation and expression. It's just an emotional reaction. It's how you feel when the game validates what you've learned, what you know, and most importantly, it validates your choices, who you are. So with that said, I want to use an example to show how to apply this framework. Using Destiny 2, I want to break down what makes its game feel tick. Why Destiny? Well, even though I'm not working at Bungie anymore, I spent a lot of time working on Destiny, and so I know it's something that I know a lot about. And you know what they say. So first off, I want to watch a playthrough video for context. We'll just watch a small part of a simple encounter in Destiny, so we're all on the same page about how it works. I'll be revisiting smaller sections of this in detail to break down what's happening. What I'm hoping what you'll take away from this is a detailed sort of overview of how the key systems behind the field work. A few examples of how I use this framework to evaluate and build expressive mechanics, and some inspiring insights into the decisions that make Destiny feel great. So, I walk into a cave, and I see 2 Scions and a Legionary. This is more than just a bad setup for a joke. It's a depiction of how I scan a room for enemies and threats. This is due to the visual hierarchy of the game. Visual hierarchy is the use of color and lighting and shading techniques and effects, etc., to sort of make characters and objects that are really important pop from the scene. They pop from the environment. They seem like they're more or less important based on how loud they are. this may not seem directly related to game feel, but it is because it affects your ability to sort of plan how you'll engage with the encounter. It validates your knowledge and awareness of what's most important. Then, when you engage with the encounter, your approach will either work or not work, and you'll learn how to do a little bit better. And so that ultimately leads to the satisfaction from learning and validation. On the flip side, if you're caught off guard by an enemy that you couldn't see, like you literally just couldn't even perceive them, it just feels frustrating. It feels unfair, and it takes you out of the moment. It ultimately makes the engagement less satisfying overall. Let's talk about cheating. So you'd think a talk about game feel with a focus on Destiny would be all about guns and how precisely we tune the shooting. But I'm intentionally not focusing on the juice of firing because I believe that the implicit satisfaction comes from more than just the sort of visceral parts of the feedback. It comes from the context and the meaning of your choices. More specifically, the recoil system at play here is a huge part of this. It's not just a fancy animation and a camera shake. We physically move your reticle. You literally have to move it back. It's trying to approximate what it feels like to shoot and handle a high caliber weapon. What's also important is that the recoil is not purely random. It's meant to have some turbulence to it, so it feels a little different each time, but it's meant to also be understandable and predictable, such that you can learn how to counter it effectively with the controller. Then, target tracking and target reacquisition, essentially how you move and control that reticle, become analog skills. They can be mastered. The mastery curve even changes with each weapon archetype. You have to learn how to handle each weapon differently. You might even end up with a favorite or a least favorite, but ultimately, even that choice becomes part of your self-expression. Without this layer of expression, you'd have a pretty decently satisfying weapon fire, actually. You'd have cool sounds, cool animation. It sounded like it hurt, but it would sort of fall flat over time because there's not as much of a rhythm to learn. There's not as much of a sort of attachment to it that rewards your continued time and investment with that weapon. And that's where the intrinsic satisfaction really comes in, is the learning. So next up is grenades. So by default, on a controller, grenade throw is mapped to the left bumper. It also comes from the left hand. You throw it from your left hand, which creates this sort of overall sense of congruence, and it sort of even helps learning. Like it creates an association with button mapping, and it even reinforces the controller, like the controlling a character is sort of metaphor of the game. All that being said, no matter how good you feel about your defaults, you should still allow for remapping. Someone is absolutely going to need it. It's really important. So the action of throwing a grenade itself is also super satisfying. And that's because it comes with something of a really deep space mechanically. The possibility space is rich enough that you could always ask yourself, what could I have done differently? How could I have done that a little bit better? And the key to this is all the intersecting layers of expression. So let's break those down. Let's go through each layer. So this is a bit of a crude diagram. So I did this in paint. I love paint. But let's say this little capsule guy here is me. I can throw a grenade, and so I can throw it in that direction. But I can also aim before I throw. So technically I can throw in any direction I want. We'll call that one vector of analog expression. On top of that, I can also move around. So I can sort of position myself before I throw the grenade. Let's call that another layer of analog expression, how I choose to move. Now let's say that if I throw a grenade, typically this is about as far as it travels. This is what it sort of how it moves over time. If I combine those two vectors of expression, I can actually throw the grenade even farther. The projectile inherits a small amount of my velocity. So it's like throwing an object in the real world, and it adds exponentially to the expression of the throw. Most importantly, this is the player's magic moment. This is when they can intuitively discover that two separate systems can actually combine as expected, and it makes them say, oh man, I can't believe that worked. It also touches on a principle that we use to really establish the core aesthetic of Destiny, the conservation of momentum. Everything that you feel in the game the momentum should always carry through somehow, be it in the projectile behavior like this, or in movement tuning, or in animation, or even just camera motion. It's all part of validation. It continuously validates your previous actions as well. It says that they have weight because some aspect of them is translated. It carries into the next actions. And it's core to what makes Destiny feel like Destiny. Anyway, let's move on. So let's add some context to our little situation here. This red guy here is hiding behind a crate. Obviously, I gotta get him. He looks like a jerk. Um, so I can try and throw a grenade behind the crate, but maybe I missed. Maybe he ducked behind it last second. Maybe I misjudged the distance. Either way, I threw a little bit short. But the grenade bounces, and it gets around anyway. I got lucky here, but the bounce is actually another vector analog expression. How you choose or don't choose to bounce the grenade becomes a form of expression and subsequently skill. We double down on this by making it so that the grenade's detonation timer only kicks off after the bounce. This makes the bounce feel like a key moment of using the grenade. And to add even more choice and expression on top of that, we tune the physics of the grenade to apply friction differently based on the angle of the bounce. This makes it so that a shallow angle versus a steep angle have very different functions, and overall, it adds to the overall expression of the throw. For example, for a shallow angle here, we apply more friction, which gives you less distance. It essentially doesn't travel very far from the first bounce. For a steep angle, we apply less friction, which gives you more distance. So it's kind of like a bounce pass in basketball almost. So I could use that to throw the grenade above the target, behind the wall, at the wall behind him, and catch him off guard. So this is what makes analog expression really important. It creates more choices, which creates more opportunities, which gives you more depth and mastery over time, and subsequently satisfaction. So moving on, what about validation? How are we validating the way the grenade works? Well, first off, the bounce behavior is sort of suggested by the physical shape of the projectile itself. It's a sphere, so you expect it to bounce. It affords bouncing. The movement trail emphasizes the way that it bounced. So all that sort of all those layers of expression of the way you can choose the way it bounces are validated here. You can see it physically. The projectile effects get more intense right before it explodes, so it gives you sort of a timing cue as to what's going to happen. And the enemies will even take cover or duck to sort of protect themselves. It makes it feel more dangerous. Then comes the detonation. Tons of layers of validation here. The explosion radius is shown by the detonation effects, both instantaneously, like the moment the pop goes off, but then also it sort of lingers around with the decal on the floor and the sparks and even the smoke, creating like a little bit of a residual range. And even the electrocution effects that we play on enemies are hit. All those layers are validating the range of the grenade, so you can keep learning it and see how to use it better next time. Next up is melee. So in this clip, I'm jumping in and punching this guy in the face. He probably deserved it. I don't know. But what I want to actually talk about is the lunge itself, the automatic targeted movement that warps my character closer to the target and punches him. Part of what makes this satisfying is that it solves a core problem with first-person games, depth perception. It's really hard to tell in first person how close something is. It's really hard to gauge distance. And so subsequently, it's really hard to know if you're close enough to actually hit with a melee attack. Lunge solves this problem by making it so that if you're within some reasonable range, we'll just take you there. We'll make you like literally leap towards the target and just get you there. It also sort of carries your momentum through, so sort of that same concept of conservation of momentum is applied here, and it drags that momentum into the performance of the death. So the ragdoll kind of tumbles down the hill here. There's actually an overall sort of systemic solution to the way we choose death performances, but we'll come back to that a little later. So for now, hold on to your corpses. So this super is called Thunder Crash. This is probably one of the most fun things I've ever gotten to work on. It started off as a sort of targeted ground slam ability, but we wanted to give it more room for mastery over time. So it kept evolving to become more and more expressive. Eventually, we built enough layers of expression here that it controlled like a steerable missile. You were the missile. Part of the challenge, though, was bringing you down eventually. So you couldn't just fly off the map or ignore all encounters or whatever. But instead of just ending the super early, we sort of applied a gravity-like force over time. It's sort of an analog constraint in a way. That way, you gradually notice it. You can actually detect that you're coming down eventually and start to plan and adapt and change the way you're steering so that you get the best of what you can get. To validate your increase in speed, we also do a bunch of stuff to make you feel faster. Just increasing your speed settings is rarely ever enough to actually make you feel faster, especially from this type of camera. But generally, the more things passing by your view makes you feel faster. So during the flight, we actually increase your field of view so that you're seeing more of the world, and toss in some anime-style action lines and movement trails, and kick off sparkly bits from your character. Basically, as much stuff, making as much stuff fly past your screen as what's possible. As you near the ground, we dynamically anticipate that you're landing and transition the camera from framing your flight path to framing the detonation, so you can see the impact of your work more clearly. Lastly, I want to talk about the activation itself. You activate Supers in Destiny by pressing the left and right bumper at the same time. We call that a chorded input window. And while we say you have to press it at the same time, we're actually quite generous. So if you press it a little bit off here and there, we just say it counts anyway. So that's part of the intent translation layer. But the most important thing is that when you actually activate the super, it cancels other actions. So especially the ones that would normally kick off when you press the left or the right bumper individually. And we do that through a system called action resolution. So action resolution is a system that determines how actions can or can't work with one another. This is a key piece behind the buttery feel of actions in Destiny. It always feels like you're getting what you want. The basic idea is that there's a table of all the possible outcomes, or all the possible actions categorized into current actions and new actions. And this way we can basically test and decide what happens when a new thing comes in over an existing thing. And essentially, we have to also introduce a rule for every possible interaction, what you can do, how every possible transition works. This is a ton of work, but it's also totally where the magic comes from a lot of times, and it's a level of control that you totally want. Here's an example entry, for instance. We can walk through everything that the grenade interacts with, how the grenade interacts with another grenade, melee, jump, etc. And this is where, for instance, we would say what happens if I'm trying to start a new grenade while I'm in the middle of a melee animation. We use something here called a keyframe, the setting, and it basically means that the grenade request is blocked until the melee has passed a certain amount of time, a certain keyframe. This means that eventually my grenade can interrupt the melee, but I have to wait for some minimum amount of time. In the case of melee, that's like I hit the frame where I'm actually hurting somebody. And instead of asking players to master that frame perfect timing to get like actions back to back, we say that if you tried to activate the grenade in this case a little bit early, like a few frames too early, we'll queue it up and then make it automatically trigger a few frames later when it can. It's barely noticeable as a player, and it basically just feels like you just did it yourself perfectly every time. And so that's another good layer of intent translation. This is what the table might look like fully filled out. And this is where we would define how a super interrupts grenades and melee so that it just works when you press the chorded input. So that's enough spreadsheets for now. Let's get back to the action. Let's check out this sexy grenade bounce here. Look at that. Boom. Super satisfying detonation. As we discussed, though, it's not just about the cool effects. It's about the sort of skillful execution of a shallow bounce, in this case, to position the grenade perfectly in that pack of enemies. But it's also definitely those sweet effects. Not just because they look cool, but because they also match my expectations as a player. It's a shocking grenade. It's a shocking death. It turns everybody into electric goo. This is due to something we call the death selector system. Essentially, based on what you killed someone with, we'll choose a different death performance. Sounds pretty simple, but the magic comes in where we feed in different parameters of damage into the different performances of the animation, or even effects or audio, all the different layers. So for example, this grenade is tagged with some metadata like grenade and electricity and stuff like that. And the death selector says, okay, I'm going to play some lightning effects on the bodies. I'll spin and contort the ragdoll so it looks like they're kind of shocked and electrocuted. And I'll even launch them with a high velocity because it matches the sort of expectations of a grenade. We'll vary this up between different types of weapons, different damage types, so that we can essentially just make snipers feel like snipers, or like fiery death lasers feel like fiery death lasers. Again, the goal here being that we want to validate your choices as a player every step of the way. So that's a lot of stuff. It's time to wrap things up. I want to revisit the core lessons that we talked about today, though. Game feel is the emotional response to the validation of expectation and expression. We all want to feel like our impact matters. You should use analog systems wherever you can to maximize choice and celebrate effect. Expressive mechanics create immersive experiences. Design mechanics for possibility space. Give players a chance to express themselves through their choices. Show players that who they are matters. Tuning for impact isn't only about camera shake. Validate choices, validate knowledge. Use feedback to emphasize how things work and how choices matter. And lastly, frameworks are more important than techniques. Frameworks let you see more of what's possible. Find a simple statement that helps you figure out what to do next. Find the core of what game feel means to you and rally around that. And with that, thank you for listening. Hit me up with questions or comments, or even if you just want to sort of argue with me on Twitter, I'm fine with that too. And we're also hiring, so come work with me. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you so much, Claude, for that really, really good look at what it takes to just make that next level kind of, really immersive game. I mean, I remember back in the day when I got Star Fox 64 and it had the Rumble Pack. And to me, I mean, that made me feel like really immersed in the game because you boost and then you feel it. And so it's something very little, but it was great for me, and it really it made me feel like I was in the game. And I remember playing Prince of Persia and for the remake, and you're running and the ground starts to shake and the character actually stumbled. And it was the first time I'd ever seen a character stumble, and it made me grab the controller really tightly, and it got me excited. And I love when developers put those little things in the game that make you really feel like, what you're doing matters. So thank you so much for taking the time to show us that it really matters and that, it's something that you really care about. So now if you're watching this at home and you have a moment like I did, with Star Fox or Prince of Persia, make sure that you post that in the chat and, post that in the comments, share, let people know that you really, you enjoy when you feel like really immersed in the game. All right. Keep it locked in. We got more for you.